Use the ingenuity of America based on the internet. Internet was created in large measure by government.
I was afraid of making a mistake. I was afraid I wouldn't measure up. I made it through that class, and I made it into 8.
We changed how we measure development, not just by the dollars we invest.
From some foreign country are heartbreaking. And it is obviously a cost-cutting measure to be able to pay people.
And the last one was, can you help us measure economic impact? Because the only way that we will raise a...
But if you measure it by the profitability of the companies, we're definitely not winning. So along comes a new...
And this is showing a more complicated human neuron, but we can measure the electrical output to know whether or not there's...
In order to measure the changes in distance of the mirrors as that gravitational
form, so that they can actually measure the conversion rates between each one.
Up with a lot of failure that doesn't measure up to the perfection.
Now, too, obviously, if you want to measure defense, and if you want to measure offense.
When you actually measure men and women on transactional and transformational leadership,
right? If you have a device on your wrist to measure your biometrics, your movements around.
So we can measure in the places where we can measure performance. So we.
Confident are they? And when you measure all of these things, this measures group cohesion.
The course, the other half got it after we did the measure. After 8 weeks, we brought them.
That's quite hard to measure. I think often we try and measure stuff as proxies. You know, you can do surveys.
And you objectively measure it rather than subjectively measure it. They are connected. And in fact,
their last full measure of devotion. Of course, we will never negotiate with the rebels. That would be to betray.
I wanted that, but I was like, I'm not going to define myself by that measure of success. I'm going to define success another way.
All right, that's a pretty good measure. Don't go any place where they won't let you.
We did a ballot measure in 2008 called Proposition 2, and this is the vote.
How do you measure whether a company has super bosses? So I have an assessment.
Now mobile technology to measure people, how to quantify their fear.
We can measure the gap, and then we can provide this data to junior colleges, vocational.
Stopgap measure. If it came down to that, and Congress went that route, I know you're opposed to it, but...
And we put them in our laboratory, and we measure their energy expenditure, and we find out they're each expending 20.
His work, and it worked with both parties, with Measure 5 supporters, to get a good product.
We have some safeguards, or we might get a initiated measure that will put ethics.
Making sure that we continue to have the ability to measure these things well will really help.
Another effect that the Measure 3 did not pass.
I hope it's not something.
Because the real measure of a partner is not when things are going great.
Than what we could measure in a multiple choice test, which was a single right answer.
Training them to do that today.
How will you measure success? We
box and ask the voters for some measure of approval to do that.
And we've, to a large measure, stopped having that aspiration in the United States.
So, here we have
of another counterterror measure of asking people when they come into the border.
Measurement on things that I sort of felt like might be difficult to measure. It might take a really long time to measure.
Yeah. So Ebola quickly got out of control. In no